Thanks for joining me. I'm Jason Hodson. I'm the Director of Data and Analytics at Routable. Routable is an accounts payable automation software program, very early startup. But we're going to talk about business process modeling with DBT and our analytics tool of Looker. However, I'll talk to you about how we can extend this out to other tools. So our gender, oh, thanks. Oh, man. Okay, you guys got something for me? Want to help me out? There you go. All right, I'm going to be up front. I'm not here to sell you anything today. I'm not here to talk about some lofty strategy. That's got its place, and I'm really excited about those things. I'm here to tell you how to get shit done. So to that extent, we're going to talk about some definitions, planning models, building these models, and using these models. And for those of you familiar with it, we're talking about the plan, do, study, act process of building these things out. And I'll kind of wrap it up with some limitations of this model as we're going to discuss it today, how we've used it, and where I see this thing going forward. So let's start with our definitions, because as Dr. Who says, words matter. I rehearsed that a lot better, and I didn't get the timing right. I apologize. So we all know what business processes are. Like, we deal with them, right? We deal with them in our data. We see them all the time, or sometimes we're involved in them. You know, our workforce processes, recruiting to workforce management, all these have stages and things we move through. Product usage, contracts, new, as we renew and bring people through these life cycles. Customer life cycles, which are as varied as the companies we represent here. And I'm going to use a sales cycle to go through it because I'm sure we're all involved in it some way or another, and it's a very simple thing to understand. So to that extent, this is our sales cycle, even more simplified than what we actually use. What's nice about our sales cycles is very linear. It moves from left to right, from our opportunity creation to qualification to when things are in active pipeline. Regardless of what you're talking about, an occurrence. These are things that start entire processes or divide steps between processes. So we have our opportunity creation, we have our qualification, we have decisions, so on and so forth. Between those stages, you have volume. So this is the number of things or the amount of money you have in a particular process. So how many active headcounts do we have? How many qualified pipeline opportunities? And as an offshoot of this, we have duration type metrics. How long are you spending in each stage, right? And I know inherently these are pretty simple things, but we want to define these. Now, I don't spend too much time on this presentation. I've condensed 22 pages of documentation into a 30-minute slide. So volume, or duration to know, is an offshoot of volume. But when I talk about duration or volume, I'm usually talking about duration hand in hand with that. So that point, when we start talking about the sales process, what sort of metrics do we have that fall in these categories, right? So we have an occurrence. How many prospects were qualified? How many closed one? These are things like sales team efficiencies, hiring team efficiencies, promotions, and things like that. Volume, active opportunity pipeline at the end of a giving period. So how much active pipeline did we have at the end of last quarter? This can help things like planning demand, marketing generation, looking forward and seeing how well our teams are closing our deals out. And then, of course, duration metrics, again, an offshoot. How long was our sales cycle from start to top? Where are our bottlenecks within that active sales cycle? All those things we can measure. As we know, sales, or our business processes can get super complex. So this is our customer life cycle. Again, this is a shortened version of it due to space. And so we can move from the left all the way to the right, but you'll notice I've got a number of branching paths. So I can go from A to B, or I can go from A to B, or A to C, all those things. What's super important to understand as we walk through this is even with these complex models, we still have to know the path that our customer, in this case, is taking, right? There's no undetermined. You can't go from A to F, for instance. That's a limitation of this model I'll discuss here today. Oops. So again, talked about two that we use. Other ones that I've implemented around human capital, occurrence. How many employees did we hire? What's our active head count for volume metrics? What's our active employee tenure? Product, sign-up processes. How many do we have in the process? How long did it take? Again, these are all identifying bottlenecks, and contracts, right? Like, how many do we have coming up for renewal? How's our renewal cycle look like? What's that MRR and ARR going to look like? All these have use and applications, as we'll see for modeling these out. Despite the various use cases, and I imagine you guys are all thinking about the source systems you have to deal with all these, even individually or compartly, the nice thing is we can templatize the creation of these models, both from a DBT perspective in our data warehouse, all the way as they come out into Looker for usage, and be able to combine these metrics for effective analysis. So to that point, let's get started. So we know we don't just sit down with that SQL pad and start hitting it. We've got to plan these things out. We've got to figure out what's going on. We know our challenges. We deal with data warehousing, the usual things, multiple source systems. How do we bring this data together and you find it? Lots of people have talked about that here. Data quality, missing data, and then predetermining our time grains. Are we reporting on a day? Are we reporting on an hour? Are we reporting on a month? All those things we need to figure out. And that's root and stock for us. We can push that through. But we've got new challenges as we talk about this. First of all, we all know we've gone to stakeholders and say, what's your process look like to A to B? And then you pull the data out and they go, what the hell is this date? There's also C, right, in there. Or you have exceptions or people not following their processes, and you find that as it comes out of the data. Historical changes to the processes, especially if you've had team turnover. Some sales teams sort of get shuffled on their way, and then a new sales team comes in, you've got a whole new process, and that really messes with your data. And then probably the most interesting challenge that can be the most limiting of this model, you don't have to just determine the lowest fact grain you're going to report on. You need to determine all the time grains you need to report on. So is that wow, I'm sorry. Do we want to get a wave going on real quick? I have 22 pages. I got to stay focused, all right? And I'm a little excited. It's been a while since I've done this. Man, you know what? I'm going to go over there. Okay. So to help plan this thing out, I have a fact stage matrix, and this is the template I use. And rather than show you abstractly, I'll show you the one that I've designed here at Routable and continue to use. And again, you notice I've further condensed this down to 4 stages. So along the top, we've got our stages, from our sales accepted, qualification, to closing our opportunities. And then I've defined the stages that the dates that define the start and end date of those. So our opportunity creation to SQO date, SQO to contracting date, so on and so forth. So now I've defined what dates I need, and you might have other data you need on this, where are these stored at, how are they stored, what time formats, all that good stuff. You can flush that out in this matrix. This is a basic thing. And then I define the metrics that I want. So pipeline creation only happens when an opportunity is qualified at the SQO date, and it is an occurrence metrics. I noted earlier that active pipeline, for instance, crosses 3 stages we have in our sales process. In this matrix, only 2. So I put it under the volume metric, and it crosses both sales qualified and contracting. The other thing that I want to point out is anything that closes a process is always an occurrence metrics. It's never a volume metric. And a good way to think about it is if we just kept accumulating what we closed, won, and lost, that would just be a number that stacks up, right? And that's not really valid or point, and it also creates performance issues. But this is a basic matrix. The other thing I want to point out is I kind of put the 10, 20, 30 very intentionally across the top. We'll see that come back here in a moment. Once you've got this flushed out, and keep in mind, you may have hundreds of metrics going across. You may have, my customer life cycle is about 8 stages, I think it is. So I've got a lot of stages going out to the right. This is a living, breathing document. You'll want to keep this maintained as you continue to develop these models and maintain them. And again, I'm brushing past a lot of stuff. There's a lot of work that goes into that, of course. But let's start building with DBT. We've got a basic idea of what we're going after. And so what I use is what this build and validate iteratively. And this isn't a secret to us. We do these things iteratively all the time. I'm sure we all just don't think the iteration ends. So you've got your fact stage matrix. First thing we do is load our dates horizontally, right? And this is especially important if they're coming from multiple source systems, but we want to get them unified on one row so we can look at, in a case, one opportunity or one employee and say, what does your life cycle look like as you move through this process? And then look for data inconsistencies. That's the advantage of putting these things horizontally, is you can look at things like stage dates that are out of order. Did a later stage start before a stage ended? Did we have missing stages where we were told that that is a mandatory stage? All those good things. Once you've identified those in some cases and sort of got your documentation down, that's where we go to our data cleansing and governance. So we're working with our source system administrators. Can we fix this data? Please fix this data. No, fix this data. No, not yesterday, tomorrow, now. Fix this data. All those arguments I'm sure we're used to having. And can we put guardrails around this, right? Hey, Salesforce administrator, you can't have a close date that happens after you qualify or happened before you qualified the opportunity. Let's get your validation rules, set those things up. Let's fix that data. And then back to our stage matrix. So I'm sure when you have those conversations, you're going to realize, oh, I was missing the stage. Oh, this isn't mandatory. Oh, we need to measure this. And so you'll go back and visit it. Cycle through this a couple times. We know we never get this perfect, right? You've got to pick a point to cut it off. But once you've got this horizontal data set out, then it's start to model it vertically. So before we get on that, though, we need to create a few extra things. First of all is a stage dimension. This may come from our source system, such as Salesforce. So Salesforce has a very nice stage dimension. I dump it out in the data warehouse. I do some mild transformations on it, but I know what my stages are, and I get this all from Salesforce. Or I may need to create this. CSV files. So this is our a customer lifecycle here. This is a seed file that sits inside of DBT, and I just define them here very nicely. Regardless of where you get the data, you need some version of a stage ID, which is going to be part of your composite primary key, and a stage's end of process Boolean. And what that is did this stage end the whole process for whatever that case? In this case, an account churn is the end of the process for that account, all sad day. Keep in mind you can have multiple stages end of process. Sales cycle is a simple one. We can have a close won or close loss. What is important though is you can only have something end their process in one stage or another. You can't have multiple. If you have multiple, you need to generate a third sort of one, and I can't think of a scenario where that's ever happened, but it's a Boolean opportunity. So I'm going to start from back to the fact table, what we're working toward, and show you how we get there. So the first thing is, again, that horizontal stage date table. So stage 10, 20, 30, 40, across the way, and this is our sales cycle. And the first thing I want you to know is I've abstracted these sales dates, or these cycle dates, and you'll see that that's going to allow us to extend and contract this process more easily with Jinja macros in DBT if I use stage date numbers rather than SQO date, close date, so on and so forth. Then we're going to take that data and we're going to transfer it from horizontally to vertical down below with what I call snapshot or volume indicators. And we'll talk about why that is when we get into Looker. So how do we do that? So flatten our dates in a stage table or a CTE. I recommend stage tables for performance issues. There's been a lot of people who have talked about that. CTEs have advantage because it's one less process in your ETL. And again, I just talked about staging or spacing our stage A tables. The last thing I want to point out is I don't like nulls personally in my data warehouse. It's an old school thing of mine. I know some data warehouses handle it better than others, but they're still just annoying to deal with. So I never like to have them. For the end dates of like current processes or ending a process, I like to use an unattainable end date, so December 31st, 2099. I pray to God that anything I build, as capable as I am, is start in use in 2099. But then again, I've cracked open things. I'm like, why the hell is this still here? So who knows? Who knows? This may fall flat on somebody some point in time in the future. But I don't like those null dates to end things out. Now, keep in mind, we know that some stages get skipped during a process. So a real example at our case is we don't have sale contracts for SMB clients. And so our prospects that are SMB, as they're moving through that process, skip that stage entirely. They're qualified, they get signed up on the platform, they skip that, and it goes to closed won. So due to that, I don't want to have an empty end date. I coalesce, or consolidate all those dates back, and you'll notice I've got that 2100 0101. That's the stage date plus one, and we'll see why that's relevant here in a moment. So now I have created this horizontal fact table. I've got all my dates arrayed this way. Now I need to get them moved this way. And again, this is where I'd probably stop and do data validation and work back through it. I may come across this several times and refine this logic. Now it's time to get them vertical. 5 simple steps. First is figure out what your foreign keys are for all this, because we're going to work toward a union statement. Figure out and create stage-dependent metric macros, and we'll see what those are in a moment. And then union those in as well. For loops, and then generate period-ending snapshot indicators, so month, quarter, year, snapshot. We'll see what that all kind of comes together here in a moment. So simple, opportunity, common primary keys, opportunity account, and account owner ID, many, many, many more. Our sales process is pretty crazy for as small a company we are. But again, we're working toward a union. The last thing you want to do is writing those over and over again and getting them shuffled around. We all know the pains of union statements. Put them in a macro. That's why God created DBT or Tristan, whoever. Next is stage-dependent metric macros. So this is going back to our fact stage matrix. This is why it's so important. So we have our closed won opportunity amount. This only happens in stage 40. And you see I'm using a placeholder of I, and also the is one qualifying. Return the opportunity amount. Very simple stuff. active pipeline amount, I in 2030. And again, it's because our active pipeline is active across multiple stages during our sales process. So for every one of those metrics that we defined back in that stage matrix, you'll have one of these little macros. And again, we're working toward a union, so macro, let's do it. Let's bring them all together. So I've defined all those before, I've determined what stages they go into, and then I start putting them together. And again, back to the Jinja and why I space out the matrix or the numbers, and I use those numbers instead of the stage names, is if I get something inserted in the middle of them or they shift back or something like this, I can manage that more easily by using these abstract numbers rather than referring to stage names or other things like this. It makes it a little more difficult to read the SQL in the Jinja, but it makes maintenance so much easier, especially if you stay on top of that fact stage matrix documentation. So we start putting this all together. Again, I opted for a stage date table for my horizontal stage date, so I'm going to bring that into this next fact table generation. Then I define my stages, so I, 10, 20, 30, 40 in my case. Bring in my primary keys, bring in my metrics. So again, I'm working toward a union. This isn't any magic to us. We should be able to figure this out. This is where it gets fun. So we need to generate the stage start date for everything. That is simply the stage start date for whatever stage I'm on. So 10, 20, 30, I'm going to bring that in as a stage start date. The stage end date, now it's a little complicated when we have a business process where an object hits a single or multiple stages in a single day. If something hits a stage or multiple stages in a single day, the last stage, the latest stage, is the only one that's considered active on that day. So if we somehow, our sales team is really on it, they create an opportunity in the morning, they qualify it in the afternoon, they get the contract out the door, legal is really on their stuff, and they close won it, well, that was never an active opportunity on that day. So there's a limitation there, is it kind of gets brushed under the rug, as it never got counted as an active opportunity. The thing it did in that day was closed won. So if it happens all on the same day, we return the end date. Otherwise, we take the end date minus 1. We don't want any overlap of our stage processes as we're modeling them out. We don't consider anything to be in a single or in multiple stages in a single day. So we back those dates up. And again, that's why we use the 2100 0101 in this case, and we backed it up by 1 day, and that ends up 12/31/2099. Next, we do the snapshot indicator is true for all stages that do not end the process. So again, if you are active in a given time period, if you were doing something, you are potentially a volume metric. But if you close the process, you are not potentially a volume metric. So 40, not in 40, and 40 is what closed our business process. We drop any stages that don't have a start date. We don't want just dumb data hanging out in our warehouse doing silly things. And then we loop it all. So here it is sort of put all together. And again, real quick from top to bottom, what are my stages? 10, 20, 30, 40, our common primary keys, our metrics, stage start date, get our stage end date, get our snapshot indicators from our dates, drop where we don't have a stage start date, union it all together. So on my stage, if I were to go look at the SQL that DBT generates for my opportunity, I would have stage 10, union all stage 20, union all stage 30, union all stage 40. Now I've got this vertically. A little bit of the final massaging I have to do. Go back to the top of your model. And again, this is where I said you have to predetermine what time frames you're going to report on in your final analytics tool, in this case, Looker. Year, quarter, and month. Note we don't do week, we don't do midweeks, we don't do halves or anything like that. We are determining just 3 in this case. What I need to do to determine snapshots or to determine occurrence metrics is return a true when something is applicable at the end of the time period the user selects. So how much active pipeline did I have at the end of the year? That corresponds to how much active pipeline did I have on 12/31 of whatever year it may be. How much active pipeline did I have at the end of January? That corresponds to how much active pipeline I had on January 31st of whatever year. 3 qualifications for that. First, the snapshot indicator has to be true, right? Anything that closes a process is not applicable to occurrence metrics. Next, again, back to that weird thing we have where sometimes we have things hit multiple stages in a single day. Only the last one is applicable. So we're going to try to count those and figure out which one the last one is. You have to be, and you'll notice I'm ordering it by the ID, in this case, reversed. And again, I simplified this model. This may not be as simple. my stage IDs are always in concurrent order. And then, this is much complicated. I don't have a lot of time to rip this down, so for those of you who are a little SQL savvy, you'll sort of have to spend some time with it. But it really boils down to this. When I look at the stage start date and when I look at the stage end date, does it bracket the time period in question? So if I'm trying to generate the year snapshot indicator, did that bracket 12/31? If I'm trying to create a quarter, did it bracket the end of a quarter? So March 31st, for instance. That's all I'm trying to generate. If these three conditions are true, generate a true for that. So again, that's the month snapshot indicator, quarter snapshot, year snapshot. So I did a for loop and I generated through all those all at one time, right? And so in this case, our data, we had a stage that started on 11/1 and ended on 2/27. It crossed a month, it crossed a quarter, it crossed a year. This next one flew through this. This is one of those one-day processes and went right to this one. This one's a little tricky because it did end on 2/28. It's still what was active, what was in that process at the end of March. So again, I'm returning true, but it didn't cross a quarter, it didn't cross a month. And again, 40 is ending my process, so it's false all across the board. And again, note I've got that dummy 2099 date set in there. So now I've got my data organized vertically in the warehouse. Last thing I need to do, set up a date table. Sorry, I know we're in San Diego. Not like that, not like that. At a minimum, and you may already have this in your date warehouse, I call it date D. A date, simply January 1st, January 2nd, so on and so forth. Booleans for all the predetermined time grains that you selected. So if that date is the end of the month, the end of the quarter, the end of the year, return true, otherwise return false. Now note that I'm talking about something that is day, month, quarter, year. You may have lower grains if you're talking about, product sign-up flow. That may happen in hours or minutes or seconds, right? You may have lower grains to that, but there's corresponding. You just need to create an analogous table for that. At this level, date tables are enough. So we've got this data set up, data to the people. Let's get it out the door. Let's get it in Looker. Now, again, we are a Looker shop, so I'm going to show you how we set this up in Looker. I've done this in Tableau, I've done this in Oracle Analytics Cloud, so we can certainly extend this logic elsewhere. You just have to adopt it to the current semantic layer. But it comes down to four things. Logically model the date dimension table inside of your tool. That's simple enough, I'm not even going to drill down on that. Determine the date grain the user is asking for. And what I mean by that is when they're interacting with content, we need to determine, are you looking at things by quarter or are you looking at things by year, right? We need to dynamically determine that because that's going to determine what rows we return. Build some occurrence and a volume flags. Those are the simplest things. So to work into that, I'm going to start with an example data. So here's 6 simple rows of data we have in our data warehouse after we loaded this fact table. And we go, why aren't you just doing this in Excel? They say, just do it in Looker because you're stupid. And I go, okay, let's do it. They say, how much data, how much metric did we create in 2021? Well, that's rows 3 through 6. Very simple. It's because the stage start date is in 2021. But they also say, how much metric did we have active at the end of 2021? Well, that's only rows 1 and 4 because it crossed the end of 2021. But if they ask those questions in the same report in Looker, we need rows 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So the first question we have to determine is what rows do we throw out from the result data set so that we can do some further processing. Again, lots of, I hope we've got some LookML fans in here. But it really comes down to we need to evaluate, first of all, based on what user selects inside of the report. And that's what the dot is selected on the very right-hand side of those. And we start from the lowest grain and we say, did we select a day? Did we select a month? Did you select a quarter? Did you select a year? If so, I return the corresponding is month end, is quarter end, is year end flags. Now we know we have scenarios where users just put a metric in a report and they filter by something and they don't put the date grain into it, right? So if they don't put anything into it, we then default to what they filtered by. So did you filter by a month, quarter, year? And then we determine the is year end Boolean flags that we define in that date dimension table. And this all goes in that date dimension table. So now we know what the users are looking for. Are they looking for year? Are they looking for quarter? Are they looking for month? Then you go over to the fact table, and this is very similar with a little bit of an extension. So we know from the date dimension table what rows we have to return. Now we have to look in the fact table and say what rows do we return. And again, it's the same logic. Did users select the month or the quarter or the year? What's the lowest grain they brought back? Return from that business process F month snapshot indicator that we generated, And then we also call that selected date time grain indicator. There it is, sorry. I won't go into the looker mess that results in that extra logic, but again, it's the same thing on filtered. If you didn't select something into the report, you filtered, I need to determine the lowest grain. At the end of the day, all we've determined is what period is the user looking at and what rows are applicable. So once we've built that out, and we can sort of wash, rinse, and repeat that logic, it's a copy and paste exercise once you build it the first time. Then we have to join to that date table. The first thing I want to point out is we require users to at least filter on a date dimension. And it can be month. We give them a default of 1 month, the current month, however we can do. You can alternate and filter by quarter or year on this. It does not make sense with these models, none at all, to say how much active pipeline and how much pipeline did we create just like that. That's a nonsensical question. So we require users to filter, also performance and all the good stuff that I know we talk about all the time. Then we join to that date dimension table. A couple things I want to point out here. First of all, we join on the date day equal to the stage start date. So again, that's that. I want everything in 2021. So that date table returns January 1st to December 31st. Returns that, or is that date that I selected between the stage start and end date, so December 31st for year ending, and return that selected fact grain snapshot join indicator. So do you need the year ending rows is what I'm doing. Notice it's an OR statement. So with that OR statement, we run that through our query, we return the 5 rows that we expect. Now the only thing we need to determine is, okay, which ones are occurrence and which ones are volume metrics. Create a couple of quick frags. The first one is a stage start effective end date equal to calendar start date. So again, if we're talking year, is the date range of the start date between January 1st and December 31st for a year, or we just use that selected time grain snapshot indicator. So did the rows that come back, are they applicable at the end of the year, at the end of the quarter, at the end of the month? Again, this is really complicated logic, but once you get it figured out, it's really simple to use. Is the metric an event? Is the metric a snapshot? And metrics or events or occurrences, snapshots are volumes right there. So once you get this stood up and you do the data validation and you get the logic all worked and all the kinks worked out, you can crank as many metrics through this model as fast as you want. I only have a few minutes. I got a little ahead of myself, so I just want to talk about, I know that's very down in the weeds. Let's come up a little bit. When I first started at Routable, we were trying to get our hands around our sales process, super important to every company that wants to sell shit and make money. I started coming in and talking about pipeline creation and active pipeline, and I got a lot of questions about what's the difference? When should we care about one versus the other? How do they go together? And so one of the first things I did was I stood up this super simple waterfall. On the very left, we have our beginning active pipeline. So when we started the time period, quarter, year, or month, whatever it is, how much pipeline did your sales reps have potentially to work on? And then, over the course of that same time period, how much did we add? So that's the next bar over. How much pipeline did we create through our demand generation efforts? And then how much did we close won and close lost? Wah, wah. That's the 2 bars going down. And what did we end the quarter with? So as we are looking at ending the quarter or within quarter, what do you have to work on at any given time? That's our volume metrics. So this is a combination of these volume and occurrence metrics. And once we had this, we were able to look at this and say, oh, do we have pipeline accumulating at the end of the quarter? If so, why? Are we not closing stuff fast enough? Are we getting past and we can start drilling down? Is our sales cycle extending? Is it collapsing and things like that? Are we not producing quality leads? All these good things. Again, this is a top level metric, but once we understood that flow and we understood what we were looking at, a combination of volume and occurrence metrics, we were able to answer those credible questions and be able to provide information to our boards and our sales team about effectiveness and focus on the problems. Couple of limitations. I mentioned this earlier. You have to have a predefined process. If we reiterate on cycles or stages multiple times, this will fall apart. If we don't know where we're going, this will not work. There are performance issues I've seen in Looker. We are working on aggregate tables. That's a whole nother discussion where you can aggregate this up and reduce those complexity. And then business processes changes can wreck a model, right? We can have a whole new business process come in, but we've got the old business processes, happens all the time. If you're inserting stages in a business process, this model accepts those, it spans and contracts to take those. But if you rewrite an entire business process, it can be painful. And obviously, if we throw out a business process, this is effective in January 1, we have to determine how to handle records that are in flight, a new process. Regardless of all that, it all comes back to this, the fact stage matrix. That's your takeaway. That's your Bible for this. This helps you maintain it, helps you stand up new models and all this good stuff. And that is exactly my time, and I apologize for the rush. Thank you.